Welcome to Counterpoint. I'm Tanya Allen. There's a lot that doesn't make sense with COVID regulations. For example, even though research suggests that the vaccinated spread variants just as much as the unvaccinated, the former don't have to quarantine upon return from international travel. Makes no sense. Sex club patrons and operators must keep 6 feet distance, except for when physical distancing cannot be maintained, like when participating in the usual sex club activities. Makes no sense. Or at restaurants, you must wear a mask to prevent the spread of COVID. However, you can then take that mask off and aspirate when you're seated at your table. Makes no sense. But I think nothing upsets me more than where children are impacted. For example, even though transmission of the virus is nearly non-existent outdoors, some schools still require that children wear masks when at play in the schoolyard. Makes no sense. I could go on, but I don't have to. You're probably scratching your head as often as I do with some of these nonsensical COVID protocols and regulations. I sigh and shake my head a lot and hope this all passes very, very soon and that we escape as unscathed as possible. It seems that many children, however, will not escape unscathed. Children continue to suffer during COVID. Research has shown a spike in cases of anxiety and depression and even suicide due to COVID lockdowns and other protocols. Children missing school, sports, their usual routines, all of this has caused a lot of grief for themselves and even their parents. And now when things attempted to return to normal for the autumn, many children are experiencing discrimination and exclusion because of their parents' vax status or even their own. Some children are being shut out of sports, such as some hockey clubs, which hold a zero-tolerance policy for parents and children who are unvaccinated. Even those with a creed exemption, even those with a medical exemption. We know children are barely impacted health-wise by the virus, and we know transmission rates are about the same between both the vaxxed and unvaxxed. So why the strict policy? If spreading the virus is a real concern, why not just rapid test every single person, child and adult? So how do these draconian policies help kids stay healthy, mentally and physically? Later in the program, we'll be hearing from lawyer Ryan O'Connor, who will walk us through the legalities of COVID vaccine policy in youth sports. But now, joining me is a father-turned-activist who himself has experienced discrimination and is going to talk about that discrimination. And he is the founder of Youth Sports Freedom Fighters. Please welcome Joe Anidjar. Hi, Joe. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Tanya, for having me on. It's an absolute pleasure.
Well, this is a very important topic. We chatted before we started recording that, I'm a parent. I have 5 children. You're a parent. Right. We all want what's best for our children. And of course, sports is so important to their mental health and well-being, especially organized sports. So I guess you've started this organization, but let's dial it back a bit. What happened to youth sports this fall?
Well, first of all, a lot of parents were just put into this ridiculous predicament. The whole way this all came about for me is the amount of outreach that was coming my way when it came to parents not being able to put their kid into sports due to these mandates. And it was just overwhelming how many parents were coming to me because I'm a pretty big hockey dad. I'm big in the community. A lot of parents know who I am and know my views. So they reached out to me for some support. And I just decided, hey, look, if there's that many people, which at that time I didn't know that there was that many parents that were dealing with this,
right.
Why don't I start a group that would bring people together, that would make people understand that, through this period, they're not alone. There is going to be support. There is going to be ways and satellite different leagues to assist and get your kids out there and playing sports. So that's how I started this group, Youth Sports Freedom Fighters. It was started on September 2nd, and, the rest is history. Currently, we're sitting at over 10,000 families from all over Canada that are in my group now, that are well awake. They understand what's happening, and it's only been 2 months, but people are so educated about what's happening, and I couldn't be any more happier about that. It's been a blessing.
Well, that's, and we're going to learn a little bit more about this organization and what happens and how people get connected and what its aim is. after we come back from commercial break. But before, I think it's so important when you say we're trying to build a community. I mean, something that's kind of been torn
Absolutely.
asunder during COVID. So I'm happy to hear there's more community building going on. But we're going to pick up this discussion right when we return in a few moments. Welcome back. We're talking about the COVID impacts on youth sports and what some parents and children are experiencing as they headed into the hockey season or any sports season for that matter. And joining me again is Joe Anidjar, who is founder of Youth Sports Freedom Fighters. Joe, you mentioned that your organization kind of emerged out of this need of parents wanting to connect, to share what was happening. But I think for our viewers' benefit, we need to know, well, what was happening? You come from the hockey area of sports. What are we seeing happening with youth in hockey these days?
So, as you know, the province of Ontario has pretty much left it up to these organizations to play God and make these mandates an actual thing.
And by these
So,
organizations, you mean like locals, like hockey clubs, provincial
absolute,
ones?
yeah. So the private clubs like the GTHL, like the OMHA, and so on and so forth, all these leagues have taken it on their own hands to mandate these vaccines for children that obviously, in my opinion, do not need it. And they're going over and beyond the recommendations from the province, which is very, it makes me ask questions. Why? Why are you leaving it up to these organizations, especially when it's involving children? You're pretty much dividing people. You're pulling kids away from a sport that they love, that gives them so much, joy during those seasons, taking them away from their teammates, taking them away from just why they play the sport in general. And it's to me, it's insanity. And
And when you
go
mentioned
ahead.
the regulations, you're right. So, for example, in the province of Ontario, I did read the guidelines or the regulation, if you will, and it was very
Right.
clear that youth who are accessing a facility that has a vaccine mandate or accessing a sport that has their own vaccine mandate, that any youth is basically under 18 who is accessing that facility or engaging in that
Activity.
activity with the specific interest of participating in that youth sport is exempt from any passport mandate, any passport or any
Exactly.
mandate. But you're right, I have seen that some organizations, you mentioned a couple, are going above and beyond. Give us an example of what do you mean they're going above the regulations? What are they asking for?
Well, I mean, a recommendation is what it is. It's the province saying, hey, look, you can recommend these vaccine mandates if you see fit. So the organizations like the GTHL, like the OMHA are going, we're following the guidelines and we're following our top doctors in Ontario, and we're going to abide by what is being said on that topic, excuse me. So to me, it's just, I have a few questions when it comes to that. First of all, you're leaving thousands of kids without playing sports. Number two, how are you recovering for the lack of registrations and the fees for the leagues? How is that happening? I know how that's happening. They're obviously getting some sort of kickback from the province to assist and to balance their books, because I'm telling you, there's thousands of kids left astray, not playing sports due to these mandates.
Okay,
And
and
it's not.
and just again to be very clear, so are these kids, because there's right now we have the COVID jab is available for those 12 and up. So are kids 12 and up who, for creed reasons, medical reasons, or whatever reasons, elect not to get the vaccine, or their parents may elect for them, because technically a 12-year-old can consent to their own healthcare.
Right.
So if they are not vaccinated in the eyes of the club, then they're being told, no, you can't participate at all?
You cannot play. The team wouldn't be able to register the team if someone was unvaccinated on the roster.
So zero tolerance policy, no exemptions.
Well, from my experience and people who have talked to me, everyone who has handed in a creed exemption or a medical exemption, it's been denied.
Wow.
And this is across the board. I have not seen one exemption be accepted, which to me, I mean, everyone has their reasons. Everyone has, a reason, and it's legit reasons. Like kids that are having that have heart issues, going to their doctor and saying, I need an exemption to play hockey. Can you please give me an exemption? And it's being denied
Being
for a
denied by the
heart
doctor or being denied by the club?
by the club,
Mm.
by the
Wow.
organizations itself. And from my gut, from the last time I've checked, I mean, these leagues are standing tall. They're not budging. They're not moving. So our group, what I've done was I tried to organize a few things with other organizations, like Take Action Canada, like these other organizations like Game On Canada, who support, what's happening. Like, they don't support the
Right.
mandates; they support the fight against it.
Okay, pause right
And
there. We've got to cut to commercial, but I want to pick this up in just a few moments.
awesome, great.
Joe, before we went to commercial break, you were discussing how you're partnering with various organizations at a federal level that have emerged, I guess, to answer the call for these thousands of children who've been shut out.
Well, to bring it back to that point, I want to mention my group is a Facebook group, and as you know, Facebook is being censored extremely, terribly. So what I had done is I reached out to another guy who has been leading the fight on Telegram, more on the legal side of things. So what I did was I merged with a few groups to bring it all together. So now, I mean, we have our Facebook group, we have our Telegram group that are pretty much giving all the people information on the legalities and what we have done so far. Our group already has the Democracy Fund sending legal letters to these organizations on our behalf. So they know what's happening. They know we're not budging, and we're going to continue to fight this. But what I was talking about is the event we threw for the kids. We locked down the streets of Toronto. We called it Shinny Night in Canada. We had speakers of all kinds, ex-NHLers, politicians, doctors, frontline nurses, and the list goes on.
Right.
And for 5 hours, the kids had the biggest smiles on their faces. They were able to play hockey in the streets of downtown Toronto. It was such a sight. It was like, even parents to this day are telling me the kids are still talking about it, and it hit home for them because when you looked at their faces, it was like going back to the normal days before pre-COVID. They were able to play.
No, I appreciate that. And again, I mentioned this earlier, that the community has really been torn asunder. So to have these kinds of community building events,
Right.
it's a beautiful thing to see. Let's talk about the under 12. So children under 12, there is no vaccine available for them, even if they wanted it or whatnot. What happens to a under 12 child, say a 6-year-old who's playing hockey and they're in a league, but their parent is not vaccinated? What happens to that child when they show up at the door to play hockey? Can the parent join them? They're a minor.
Absolutely not. If that parent is unvaccinated and their child is vaccinated, that child will essentially have to go into the arena by himself or herself and pretty much walk in as a 6-year-old, go to the dressing room and get dressed fully by themselves.
Wow.
That's
That's
what would
crazy.
happen
I can't even
while
imagine that, because I know what
while
it
the
takes to
parent
do
is
up
outside.
skates. I think of what it takes to do up skates. I remember I play hockey. I know what a struggle it is to do it my own. I
Absolutely.
can't imagine a 6-year-old doing up their own skates. But is this safe? I mean, to me, maybe I'll ask the lawyer this in the next segment, but this seems like that this is a safety issue. Who's got guardianship of this child while they're in this arena?
Totally, and it's a huge liability issue. I mean, if something were to happen to that child while in your presence, what happens? Is it on the parent because you didn't allow them in, or is it on the organization? Who takes liability? And this is the story of these vaccines as well. No one is taking liability. There are way too many red flags. There's people like myself who have done hours and hours and hours of research, enough to make a decision, for myself and for my family, right?
Okay, so with respect to hockey, and with these mandates, which obviously there are many, as you said, thousands of children who've been excluded, do you see anything changing in the near future? You take Ontario, for example. If Doug Ford were to ban these mandates, just say no, like we're going to enforce this and we're going to ban mandates in youth sports, as his
Right.
protocol says, that probably would solve it. Is there any hope that that would happen?
Well, for the last time I heard, the province had mentioned they were aiming to have these mandates, I believe, lifted by March. So I mean, if you're foreseeing that you're going to lift these mandates in March, when you understand that these caseloads are going down each and every day, people are trying to get back to life. Why couldn't you just speed up that process? Because he knows there are people suffering. He knows. Doug Ford knows that there are parents, because they reach out to him every day, and I see little messages here and there that parents are sending to him
Right.
about their struggles, about what's happening, and why their kid can't play hockey or basketball or whatever the case may be. And the
Okay,
fact that he's continuing is just ridiculous.
we only have 20 seconds left. Will
Sure.
sports ever be able to gain parents' trust again after this?
Organizations who mandated these, for me, I don't think so. There's other leagues that are trying to come up, like the ORHL. It's the Ontario Rep Hockey League. Totally does not discriminate whether you're vaxxed or not. They are starting teams in Toronto. The Toronto Lions is the first one that is being up, and they're having skates and going to tournaments. So that's a great sign. I just hope things continue to flow in that direction. We can get back to normal, because that's what everyone wants.
Okay, Joe, thank you so much for your time today. Welcome back. We're now going to hear from litigator Ryan O'Connor, who's going to walk us through some of the legalities of these policies, whether they can be challenged, and what parents and children can do if they want to challenge them. Hi, Ryan. How are you?
Doing well today.
Thank you so much thank you for joining me there. So again, we've heard so much tumult with respect to youth and sports this fall. Some parents are saying their children are excluded. Some parents themselves are excluded from these facilities. Kids seem to be back to where they were mental health wise with the first lockdown, which they feel isolated. They have nowhere to go. It's a mess. So can you please just walk us through what exactly is happening out there?
Well, I think that's putting it mildly, Tanya. It's a bit more of a mess. Kids have been out of sports, practically speaking, for nearly 2 years now. The province has imposed a vaccine passport policy, which applies to sports and gyms and recreational fitness facilities, but it has deliberately excluded individuals aged 12 to 17 from having to show proof of vaccination. But what public health units and individual geographic areas throughout the province have imposed their own effectively vaccine passport policies requiring showing proof of status for those aged 12 to 17. So what it's done is that kids and teens in Toronto and in Peel region, York region, and other places in the province have to show proof of vaccination, effectively saying that they have to be vaccinated in order to play sports. But we have a patchwork of policies. So I think it's fair to say it's at least a mess, if not more.
Well, and some organizations are allowing exemptions. And as we just heard from our previous guest, some of these hockey groups it's a zero tolerance. Even if with a bona fide medical exemption, there is no tolerance. So where do our charter rights fit into this? I mean, you have the government, when you speak of Ontario, the government of Ontario policy says that youth should not be denied access to their sports or the facilities if their intention is to participate in a youth sport activity. But then you get these, like you said, the local health units are saying no, or the local facilities say no, we will deny them entry. Where are the charter rights for these children?
Well, the charter doesn't apply to individual leagues or associations that impose these policies if they do so themselves. But it does apply to the public health units who have issued instructions to these organizations to impose these policies. And any sort of vaccine passport policy for youth sports, if it doesn't have broad exemptions for individuals who can't be vaccinated for medical reasons, for reasons of their faith or religion, it would be a breach of the charter. And the question is whether or not the breach is actually justified in terms of promotion of public safety and the like. But the real significant concern is actually the potential breach of the Human Rights Code. The Human Rights Code does apply to individual organizations and associations and leagues, and also to the activities of the public health units. And most of the health units policies actually don't provide, for example, a religious exception, despite the fact that someone had a sincere faith-based reason why they cannot be vaccinated. That is protected under the Human Rights Code and potentially a breach of it if that policy is imposed without that exception.
Now, why not rapid testing? I find this one has always shocked me. So, we've seen studies suggesting that the transmission is equal to between those who are vaxxed and unvaxxed. So transmission is still happening. If the objective with these policies is to stop transmission or to identify those who could be transmitters, why not just rapid test anybody? Vaxxed, unvaxxed, adult, young? Wouldn't that make sense? Why is that not a consideration?
Well, that should be the consideration. We look at today's case counts, for example, they're nearly even between those who are vaccinated and those who are not vaccinated. So I think testing would be a far better alternative. It certainly doesn't impose medical treatment on children and teens and parents that may wish to wait or have very valid reasons why they don't wish their families to be vaccinated. So rapid testing is an option. Screening is an option. Screening is a requirement as well. Contact tracing and the like. All of those are mitigation measures that are far less intrusive than, again, requiring someone to take medical treatment with which they're uncomfortable or which they simply cannot receive.
So say there's a parent who has a child who perhaps was denied access to a facility, because sometimes the club has a good policy or an inclusive policy, but then the facility itself says, no, we have this policy, so you can't use our facility as a club. So what happens if a parent has a child who wants to go to a facility and the facility is saying, no, you can't, even though the child wants to participate in the sport? What can a parent do? We have about 25 seconds.
Sure. Well, there could very well be grounds for human rights code complaint. There's grounds to challenge the public health unit's policies, in terms of the charter issues and the human rights issues. So there are lots of legal responses that are available. Sometimes it requires a simple letter from a lawyer to address those. Other times it may require court action. But we're hearing that more and more parents are mobilizing to seek legal counsel where appropriate and potentially challenge these policies.
Okay, Ryan, that's all the time we have. But thank you so much for your help today. I appreciate it.
No problem. It's good to be with you.
Thank you. I think for many parents and children out there, what they sense is that this actually makes no sense. And it's so hard for these families because they've suffered so much during COVID, and now to yet again have a season where their children aren't going to be playing sports, it's quite trying. For Counterpoint, I'm Tanya Granick-Allen.